We all want gardens that last longer and are more likely to succeed. Here are the plants that have lasted well over a year in our desert garden. Strawberries. Our one experimental plant survived the heat. I will say though, that location very much had a role. The strawberry plant was under 50% shade starting around 8 in the morning around the summer solstice. By 4 p.m., it had full shade for the rest of the day from this tree right next to it. This is not a particularly shining example. We didn't have very many strawberries, and the ones that we did were very small this spring. But that doesn't stop us from trying. And now there is a strawberry patch here as well as in our in-ground bed. So we're still experimenting with strawberries. There's nothing better than a freshly picked strawberry, even if it's really tiny. It's also interesting to note that we planted this one last spring and we planted the rest of our 12 strawberry plants in the fall, and they overwintered as well. When we did have freezes, we did protect this area as well as the in-ground bed with sheets. I will save what we learned from this first year in a follow-on video, but know that they will last through the summer and through the winter. Next up is okra. It is a well-known fact that okra is a heat-loving plant, but cold was not able to cover these during our freezes. We had to triage what got the sheets and what didn't, and these massive 6 feet tall plants did not make the cut. So this had to survive on its own. We had 8 plants, and this is the last one that survived. There was one more okra plant that almost made it, but the last freeze got it. But I am keeping this in place, not only because there are some new flowers that are about to show up, and we've enjoyed the okra from this plant since last June. It's almost June again, so we've had 12 months of okra every month of the year. But let me modify that. It was really fun to pick something every month of the year. It's interesting to note how the pods changed over the course of the year. They started out long, and despite the larger size, they were tender. As the temperatures turned colder, the pods started to develop into funky shapes, and they were tougher, even if they were harvested within a couple of days. This is also going to be a living trellis. So the Kentucky pole beans will start growing up this and use it as a live trellis. This is a red burgundy okra. The generic okra that we got from the local nursery didn't do so well. None of those survived. Side note here, I would never buy a generic type plant again. I want to know the specific variety so that I'll know what it is and to know ahead of time if it grows well in my specific planting zone. We have 4 different kinds of okra that we planted from seed, and we'll see how well those do over this next year. Look at what I just found a day ago. The pods have straightened out. It's been about a month since I shot that video. I did not expect that the pods would go back to normal. Those are so pretty. This is just like the beginning of last season. Next up is bell peppers. There was a 100% survival rate of the 3 plants that we started with. And the school garden that we helped take care of, that plant lasted at least 2 years, maybe even 3. Perhaps it might have lasted even longer, but plans change. And that's no different than what I have planned for these 3 plants, because truthfully, you only get a couple bell peppers per season if you're lucky. I mean, some of these only gave us 1 good-sized bell pepper. So rather than continuing on with this, I am planning on cutting these down, allowing something else to go in its place, and trying out Jimmy Nardello and shishito peppers, which are set to be a lot more prolific. We'll see. Petunias. This is one that surprised me with how well it handled both ends of the temperature spectrum. Despite only 1 of 6 surviving, a few made it through the summer. The heat was intense. It was a little too much for 3 of them to handle, but some made it into winter. Now, the freezes did kill them despite being covered, but this one survived. This was a big surprise. Basil. This patch right here is over 10 years old. Started with a 6-pack of sweet basil from Home Depot. It is very drought resistant and will reseed itself. This here is the third or fourth generation. The first generation was just over my head. I'm 5'6". So either the wind, the birds that come up and eat the seeds will reseed themselves all around the area. However, it's not a hugely invasive plant. The cotyledons are very distinct, so you won't mistake them for any other seedling or any other weed, and you can just easily pick them. But you can see these are very woody, very old, 2, 3, or 4 years old at this point. I did have a heck of a lot more basil in this front area, but we are repurposing it to try out other plants in this specific spot. And also we have some cinnamon basil, so looking forward to see how well that does over the years, hopefully. It's not just heat resistant. We didn't have enough blankets over the winter time when it came to freezes. So this whole area did not get covered, and you can see they're still surviving. Of all the plants I'm going to cover, basil requires the least amount of water. I've not watered any of the older basil since the rains over the winter, which stopped in March, and they are still hanging on. Even when I water it with water from the city, it won't get much better looking. It really responds to monsoon rains. All of this old growth just gets covered in new growth. So just because it looks ugly, you don't have to hack it off. It will come back when the rains come. Tomatoes. It has been a horrible spring for tomatoes. Although this is one of the original sun gold tomatoes that we planted last spring. But nothing has really come out, just a couple of flowers here, and the rest of the tomatoes that we planted, those all did not make it, despite getting covered through the freezes. However, we did see some success in the school garden. That tomato plant lasted for years and had hundreds of cherry tomatoes. There are other plants that are more likely to survive long term, but there are reasons you may not want to plant them in your garden bed, like mint. Mint grows great, but it will take up an entire bed. I actually do have a chocolate mint that survived the summer in a container and went dormant in the winter. It wasn't doing particularly good. In fact, it was pretty well dead at the bottom there and just came back in the spring. It's doing pretty good now for what it was. I totally forgot about it and I did not water it during the winter. Mint is hardcore. Of course, some of these plants survive because winters are not too harsh here in the low desert of Arizona, and any freezes generally only last a few hours in the morning. However, they do contend with intense heat in the summer and some massive monsoon storms towards the fall. The experiments will continue, and I will put follow-on videos in this playlist right here. I'd also love to hear from you. What plants have gone year after year? Surprises like petunias or okra. I would love to hear that. Thanks for watching.